You're on.
This is a meeting of the Ways and Means Committee. We will have some first readers and a signing committee, as well as a bill to take up in the full committee. House Bill 480 is Representative Jurgensen or his designee here. Didn't see him, so we'll move down to House Bill 564. Representative Maddox is here. And Representative Maddox, and for everybody else, the procedure is that the Secretary will read the caption of the bill. I will assign it to committee, and then you will make a brief explanation to the full committee about what your bill does and stand for any questions that the committee might have. So, Mr. Secretary, if you would read the caption.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To amend Code Section 4857.4 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to bona fide conservation use assessment of property for ad valorem tax purposes.
Ad valorem tax subcommittee. Representative Maddox, you may explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. I appreciate your time today. Essentially, you see before you, this is a one-page bill, and what it would do would be to add an exemption to the CUVA statute, such that basically solar farming would not be a breach of the CUVA covenant. And how this came about is I've got a constituent who owns some farm property that's in a conservation use valuation assessment under a CUVA contract and has put some solar panels in. Once you start generating electricity, you sometimes, like he has done, has outgrown he produces more electricity than his farm needs, puts it back on the grid, and the counties are telling him that that would be a violation of his CUVA contract on his property. So we'd like to take a look at that.
Questions from members of the committee? Representative Williams has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once this solar panel is set up, would they be allowed to sell any of this power, or is it just strictly for the use of the property owner?
No, what is contemplated, what my constituent does is have the electric companies will do buyback agreements with you. I think the power companies actually, I think Georgia Power actually had a green initiative or a solar power initiative to try to foster some of this type stuff. And there's been not from what I've been told, there's not, and of course we would welcome their input, and I'm sure we will get them in the subcommittee. But from what I understand, there's not been much of a supply, and this hopefully will try to open up some avenues to create. Think of it as like agribusiness, or yet another way that farmers will be able to utilize their farmland.
Thank you.
Representative Martin has a question.
I'm trying to get my hand. So basically, this is a commercial activity you're going to have going, but they still want to get the CUVA exemption. I'm just trying to decide. I mean, maybe that's for debate in subcommittee, but that's what essentially you're after, because they're going to have to disturb the property. There's a significant amount of work going on there, but they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too.
Well, and I think some of the examples will show. Some of the limited research that I've done is like, these solar panels being put in that are not an interruption of their farm activities. It's kind of in addition to. But yes, it'd basically be to try to open up another possible revenue stream for the farm without breaching their. And it may be similar to the like the cell tower exemption, which is in current law that reads that the space set out can be designated for that, and they can lease to a cell tower, and that wouldn't subsequently breach the entire CUVA restriction.
Well, I see that, but I mean, there's significantly different in percentage of the property. A cell tower's footprint may be 100 by 100, and this would have to be thousands of feet to be a commercially viable enterprise, would it not?
Well, and I'm not sure as far as the specifics of the size to conversion of power ratio. Like I said, that'd be for the experts to come in and probably debate that.
Vice Chairman of this committee, Representative Knight, has a question.
I think maybe Chairman Martin and you had just discussed it, but I think what perhaps you're looking for is if something is incidental on the property, it is not over exceeding what the farm value or the original value purpose of the conservation use qualification is. That's what you're
Correct.
saying.
Correct, that's correct.
Thank you.
Representative Sims, Secretary of the Committee, has a question.
In that regard, I was thinking cell towers, but you also have to take into consideration, as far as Representative Martin's consideration, you know, there are thousands of feet of chicken houses, there's thousands of feet of poultry or swine houses or farrowing pens down in that area too. So that still enhances the agricultural, even though those are typical agricultural products, agricultural commodities. This would be no different than that if you were. It would not violate the CUBA at that point in time either.
Exactly right.
And I like what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's kind of what I was saying by, I think, but, you know, when we get into discussing possible applications to the farm, that you'd see it kind of be in addition to what they're doing.
What you're not doing, you're not selling the property to make a subdivision or trying to
Correct.
block sell it out, and that's basically what the CUBA was presented in the past, was that you didn't try to sell the property, and take it out of conservation use at the time.
Absolutely correct.
Representative Black.
I think most of my concerns have already been expressed, that we don't want to get into something that exceeds the intent of legislation, and I think you might need to be looking for some language to put a cap on it. So other than
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Representative Beasley Teague.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just I always want to be clear on it, because I know we do it in Marietta in a plant, but in this industry, you said that Georgia Power buys it back?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Or the EMC,
Whoever it is, whoever the power company is. And so it's not like he's going to make a living off of it, right?
Correct. I mean,
Okay.
well, that would depend on the type of application. I think it would be in addition to their farming activities.
So they'll keep both of them going, so it's not like of changing what
Yes,
they're
ma'am,
doing.
and that's,
Okay.
that's the, I think the original intent of this bill is not to create a huge market for commercial solar electrical producers, but that's going to be a topic of debate in the subcommittee as well.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Battles.
Representative Maddox, the question that I have is, it doesn't seem that there is any limitation in the amount of this set-aside property to be used. Whether or not, and I think to keep from there to be misuse of it, that there should be some indication of size, maximum number of acres may be set aside for this. Was that ever considered in drafting this, that there would be, this is kind of open, that ultimately, if this was passed, they could use 75% of the land for solar panels, and it doesn't look like that there's a limitation. I'm just saying that in going forward, there probably needs to be something designated as maximum use of this property.
You're exactly right, Representative Battles, and this bill is not intended. I'm not optimistic enough to think that this language would pass straight through. I did drop it last year to try to get it out there so that the stakeholders all could get together and see the information. And I'm being very candid with the way that I came up with this was through a constituent of mine. But I'm open. I'm not a specialist or an expert in CUBA or anything like that, and I know this committee is, and so I'll be open to any and all suggestions and recommendations.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions of members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Representative Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is Representative Marion or his designee here for House Bill 578?
Mr. Chairman, I always wish to get that one read. Every time I look at it, I think it's Martin. It scares us.
Jumping on down to House Bill 761, is Representative Parsons here or his designee? Representative Parsons. House Bill 794, Representative Mayo. The Secretary will read the caption.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 794 by Representative Mayo and others to amend Code Section 4852 of the Official Code relating to definitions regarding ad valorem taxation of property so as to change certain definitions, provide for related matters, and provide for an effective date and repeal conflicting laws.
Ad valorem taxes, subcommittee. Representative Mayo, you may explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and distinguished members of this committee. House Bill 794 is a fix to an unintended consequence of a bill we passed a couple of years ago, which redefined arm's length transactions for real estate sales, and it included bank-owned properties, foreclosures, REOs, public auction sales as arm's length transactions. And I'm not redefining this definition in the bill, so we still want arm's length transactions to include those bank-owned foreclosures, REOs, to give a consumer, a homeowner, a tax assessor a reasonable gauge on where the market is, what value is reasonable and appropriate for a property. Where the changes were made, and I believe the unintended consequences, where you see the line stricken through the maximum allowable fair market value. And it would essentially, based on the law on the books now, allow a county tax assessor to use the maximum allowable fair market value using a distress sale, which was otherwise known as a distress sale, foreclosure, bank-owned REO property, and require that the assessor use that transaction as the maximum allowable fair market value for the next taxable year. And there are many who believe this is unfair and a little bit punitive to homeowners who, when they open up their tax bill and realize that they were hoping for some reduction because of the foreclosures that have taken place around them, they now feel like the pendulum has swung a little bit too far in the other direction, and they've now been hit with extremely low and very depressed home values, which may not and oftentimes do not reflect the true market value of their home, of the happy homeowner, the person who's maintaining their home, who wants to be there. They're not in a distressed predicament. But these distress sales, which often can be as low as $10,000 and $20,000, particularly when we see public auctions and banks selling from one bank to another, moving inventory off their books to clear some of this foreclosure inventory, they are now going to be imposing the low distressed values, the depressed, unreasonable, extremely low values on homeowners in our communities who are going to be affected by depressed values. And if they go sell their home or trying to refinance, then this is going to be the value on the books with the tax assessors. And while appraiser may not use that, it's something that is going to catch the attention of a home buyer or an appraiser. And we just feel like this law went a little bit too far in requiring that assessors use distressed sales, otherwise now redefined, as the maximum allowable value when determining the value of a non-distressed happy homeowner. The second section of the bill, the only change we made on the second page, was to say that the tax assessor shall consider the following criteria, which was laid out in the previous legislation. And again, it's to give the local tax assessor and local government the discretion to use this criteria, but it doesn't mandate and require they use this as sort of the driver in coming up with a reasonable fair market value for a homeowner. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Representative Stevens has a question.
In looking at the bill, and I appreciate where you're going, Representative Mayo, but won't this increase the tax of the homeowner if they aren't forced to consider those true fair market values, which might be auction price?
Absolutely, Representative, which is why we would like those properties to be considered, without a doubt, and they will be considered. And you see on line 19, we give the flexibility and the discretion of that consideration to the tax assessor, so we're not imposing our will and forcing them to use the maximum allowable fair market value. So in other words, where it says the transaction amount of the most recent arm's length bona fide sale. So let's just say the most recent bona fide arm's length sale was a property in your neighborhood, Representative, that sold from Chase to Bank of America for $20,000. That would be the most recent bona fide arm's length sale in that year. So do we want that to be the maximum allowable value when the assessor's considering fair market value for your home? Or do we want to give that tax assessor the discretion to use that sale as one of the criteria by which they evaluate the value of your home?
To give my tax assessor discretion, I can tell you the answer to that. And I'll point specifically to line 31 where it says the tax assessor shall, and we're striking apply and inserting consider. Just as a personal opinion, if we're looking at what the net effect is to the homeowner, it's the net effect of the bill could be an increase in tax.
It's possible, Representative, but I would point out that we're still considering bank-owned, short sales, distressed sales, sales at public auctions. They are going to be considered. I just don't believe it's fair for that to be the driver, the predominant guide for an assessor to determine the value of one of our homes, where we may be in a good situation, our home is properly maintained, and you know in your heart, and as others have witnessed in our communities, you see a house that sells across the street and another one that sells down the street. If you've got two sales that are distressed properties that may have sold for extremely low prices, I just don't believe it's accurate to use those as the guide and the driver when determining the value of a home of someone who's in a predicament where they're not distressed or in jeopardy of losing their home, and they may have a home that's in great condition and plan to stay in that home and use it as a means to retire and live happily ever after. But yeah, we still want to consider foreclosures, bank-owned sales, short sales. That doesn't go away. We don't redefine it. The law, the bill we passed a couple of years ago, redefined arm's length transactions. So previously, an appraiser or an assessor could not even consider. They could not use foreclosure sales, short sales, bank sales, or public auctions when determining the value of your home. Now those can be considered. So if there's two foreclosure sales that sold at really low prices on your street, absolutely, they should be considered because they're part of the market. They're part of the reality of our housing market in a community. I just don't believe, I think though that the intent was to prevent the, where we were ignoring and not considering those properties because we had such a large increase and a wave over the past 5 or 6 years, and it became relevant that we consider foreclosures as part of the overall market evaluation. My belief though is that it's gone to the point where we're giving the foreclosure sale too much weight on the assessment. So again, I'm not a fan of raising taxes or having someone's taxes increase, but I'd just like to see a little bit more parity, and I'd like to see if the house is assessed at one value, then we want to make sure that it's fairly reasonable and not extremely depressed, so that it's not even a realistic lowball tax bill if that's what happens. But I'll take any other questions if you'd like.
Thank you, Representative.
Vice Chairman of this committee, Representative Knight.
Representative Mayor, I'll just follow up on what the Chairman just talked about, and I look at the word consider, and I probably can imagine how long these tax assessors would consider this, and that would probably be for just a fleeting moment. And again, I think you're looking at going in here and probably just doing away with this, because when we say consider, it doesn't lead them to. That's all they have to do is consider, and then they can move on. So I would urge great caution right now with this, because we're probably going to end up, if this were the case, and looking at increased property values at a time when our economy and property values are truly at a low, because this economy has been high for forever. Property values have been up, and we're going through a correction, and I think that's part of what we've got to go through to get our economy back in order. And I fear this.
Thank you, Representative. I would say, though, that homeowners will still have the right to appeal. So while the tax assessor may disagree and assess your home at a level that you're uncomfortable with, if they don't consider or they do consider sales that you believe to be relevant, I would say that there's still recourse for the homeowner because they can file the appeal and dispute that assessment. And here in the General Assembly, we've been more than generous to allow for the appeal and arbitration and a number of things that are friendly to homeowners and punitive to counties, I would suggest. So I would say to you that there's still a process. There's still a potential recourse opportunity for that individual if they disagree with the assessment of the assessor. And I just believe at the end of the day that this is going to create a market that is going to stop the bleeding, so to speak, and stabilize the housing market in some way, because we're not going to realize artificially low values on properties that have been compared to distress sales, bank-owned, public auction sales in our communities. But I certainly understand your thoughts.
Representative Flood has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Mayo, I appreciate the thoughts and the consideration behind what you're trying to do here. And it seems to me there's another part of the equation that we haven't touched on yet, which is for those homeowners who are now trying to sell their homes. And probably one of the reasons that we still are mired in a very difficult recession is because of the lack of home sales. If people were able to get true fair market value as opposed to the depressed values, then they'd be in a better position to sell their homes. So while there may be some impact on some homeowners to have a tax bill that may not have decreased as much as they would have liked for it to decrease, it probably will have the positive effect for those people who are trying to sell their homes and be able to sell those homes at a much more reasonable price as opposed to an artificially depressed price.
Absolutely, and I would add to that, they would also have a better opportunity to refinance their home and take advantage of the low mortgage rate, the historic low mortgage rates that are available. And thank you for that, Representative.
Representative Martin has a question.
Mr. Chairman, I know we've beat this around a bit, but having just refinanced, I mean, refinance doesn't look at the tax assessment. They look at comparables in the area. So, I mean, I as a homeowner want the assessment to be as low as practical to drive my tax bill down, which, by the way, if my tax bill is low, makes my home easier to sell. If I can inquire, was this brought to you by a tax assessor?
I had conversations with a couple of tax assessors, and the recommendation was to redefine arm's length transaction.
I would agree with you. That's what we need to do before, because
Well, I thought that was going to take us back in the other direction, and I believe that arm's length transaction and consideration of what we now define as an arm's length transaction, a consideration of distressed sales, short sales, bank sales, and sales at public auctions should be considered. And I would also say to the committee, the federal government has, this is kind of a sidebar, but the federal government has proposed a program called foreclosures to rental. And we're going to be taking a lot of inventory on the books at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and using that to clear and remove from the government's books and put it back out into the market. So I think that as we continue to have another wave of foreclosures, distress sales, extremely low and depressed prices, that we're going to adversely affect homeowners and communities who may be impacted.
who is we?
We, the General Assembly.
We are going to take
Without action, sir.
No, you said we are going to take properties out of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and
Oh,
put
we.
them back on the. Who is that we?
We the taxpayer. We the
By
government.
what vehicle?
We the people. The Federal Housing Administration, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac.
We're from the government, and we're here to help. I'm done.
I'm not sure I understood. Did you have another question?
I wanted to know where the bill came from, and the tax assessors makes perfect sense that they would want it.
And I would also say to you, sir, that the bill came from a number of constituents who have been impacted and feel like their home values have deteriorated to the point where it's just completely unreasonable and does not reflect the true fair market value.
Representative Mayor, I see no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
House Bill 808, I see in the audience the Dean of the House, a distinguished veteran of World War II, Representative Yates. You'll be making your way up, sir. And Mr. Secretary, if you read the caption, please.
House Bill 808 by Representative Yates and others to amend Code Section 48727, Official Code, relating to computation of Georgia taxable net income, so as to provide for an exclusion applicable to certain income of disabled veterans.
Income Tax Subcommittee. Representative Yates, you may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill started with Senator Albers brought it over to me and said that it had been brought to him by veterans groups of interest, and they noticed that it had money involved, so it should be in the House instead of the Senate. So I took his bill and copied it, had the Legislative Council copied it in the House. I've got a couple of statements that pretty well covers what the bill does. I can leave you a copy with you, or I can read it to you now. It's presently under Georgia law, members of the military reserves and Georgia National Guard who are disabled and retired and are receiving 90% totally and permanently disabled and receiving the pension, they are not taxed for this disability payments. With the passage of this bill, all members who are fully disabled and retired from any of the armed forces would also be exempt from Georgia income taxes.
Representative Beasley Teague has a question.
Oh, I was just trying to see if hearing, if they know loss of hearing would be one of the, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. If loss of hearing would be one of the reasons they're disabled, or we're just giving them some examples?
Well, the bill explains what is, they consider 90% or 100% as 100% in their parlance. The loss of, these are the things that's covered: loss of permanent loss of use of one or both feet, loss of permanent loss of use of one or both hands, sight in both eyes, permanent impairment of vision of both eyes, central vision accurate is 20/200 or less in the better eye, and it goes on down and gives those descriptions. It's in the bill. You got a copy of the bill there.
Yeah, but I didn't see hearing on here when.
Well, apparently it's not covered as totally disabled, because a lot of people do work and hear. I can't hear.
Okay. Thank you.
I think.
Representative Martin has a question.
Chairman Yates, if you take my question, does the federal government provide an exemption for veterans as well? I should know, but
all
disability
all disabilities are paid by the federal government.
I understand, but and they don't. Our disabled veterans don't pay federal income tax on that money, do they?
Not the ones that's my understanding.
So this would just be,
this would be kind of giving fairness to all of them,
yes,
the
sir.
same as they get from the federal government.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Representative Sims has a question.
Chairman Yates, on this, is it only these one I, lines 18 through 21, I, 2I, 3I, and IV? Those are the only things that we're going to consider as far as that disability is concerned?
Well, the Veterans Administration rates people from 10% up to 100% when they give them their pensions. I mean, the 10% pension is very small, and it goes on up, and they consider 90%. When they refer to 90% and 100%, they're referring to the same thing, more or less. I guess when you get to 90%, you can't really do much, and they rate them that way, and your compensation is paid based on what the rating is.
What about total spinal injury?
About what?
Total spinal injury or brain injury, when you have someone that is, just sitting in a hospital bed?
I would think it would fit the category of totally disabled.
I just want to make sure that we don't leave somebody out with a total spinal injury or a total brain injury that, we may want to look
Yeah,
at adding
I
that.
get involved in this when I'm helping people get
I agree.
Social Security disability, and the term they like to use is totally and permanently.
I understand. Well, I agree with you, and I agree with what you're doing. I just want to make sure that we don't leave somebody out with a total spinal injury, that
That would-
leave somebody paraplegic or whatever.
That there would be what?
That we would not leave out somebody, if these are the only four we're considering, that if we didn't consider a total spinal injury or a total brain injury at that point in time, that we would, I
think
just want to make sure that we didn't.
The 90%, the 100% covers most things, I would think, in category. I mean, you know, if you had a spinal injury, you couldn't move or whatever, you'd certainly be 100%. I don't know why that he got this from the standard list from the Veterans Administration.
Understand. Let's just be. I just would want to be prudent on that, so we would not leave out someone with that kind of disability.
Well, if you want to amend it or whatever, if you want to.
We wait to get to committee.
Okay.
Yes.
Representative Yates, I see no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And what I wait to hear, what committee, subcommittee I go to?
Yes, it's an income tax subcommittee.
Okay. Thank you.
But you do have to request of the chairman of that subcommittee to have a hearing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And that is Representative Peak, by the way.
Okay. Thank you.
House Bill 814, Representative Atwood. Mr. Secretary, if you would read the caption.
Yes, sir. House Bill 814 by Representative Atwood and others to amend Article 3, Chapter 8, Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to county sales and use tax so as to expand the matters in which are included in an annual reporting of the expenditure of certain special purpose local option sales tax proceeds, provide for the enforcement of actions by the Attorney General, and provide for related matters. Thank you.
Sales Tax Subcommittee. Representative Atwood, you may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is essentially a taxpayer transparency bill. It spans the matters which are included in annual reporting of the expenditure of certain special purpose local option sales tax proceeds. Specifically, under current law, no later than December 31st of each year, local governments that receive SPLOST revenues are supposed to publish in a newspaper of general circulation a simple report, a non-technical report which shows the original estimated cost of each project, the current estimated cost of it if it's not the original cost, amounts expended in prior years, and amounts expended in the current year. This bill adds to the requirement that already exists any surplus funds which have not been expended for a project or purpose, the estimated completion date, and the actual cost upon completion. It lets the taxpayers know simply what's being done with their money, and it also allows the superior courts to enforce compliance with the provision of the bill, and also allows the Attorney General to bring enforcement action if that is indeed necessary. What prompted this bill, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, down in my district we had essentially several $1 million that were found and not exposed to the or advised. The people were not advised about it. It created quite an uproar down where I am. We attempted to look at local legislation, found out we can't do it that way, according to ledge councils. So we've bringing it before you. That's essentially it, sir.
Questions of the author? Representative Sims.
This may be a question to General Counsel. Didn't we had a bill similar to this a couple of years ago, I think, Mr. Chairman, where we had, when you had exposed funds that were not spent or you did not have enough money to complete the project and they just sat there. Is counsel here? Okay. I'll just ask him when we get to committee.
Will do.
Representative, the Vice Chairman of this committee, Representative Knight, has a question.
Aren't these items also, and it's been a while since I've done an audit of a local government, but aren't these items also listed in the annual audit report?
What is not listed, according to what I've been advised, is surplus funds.
Okay.
Which is what we're adding. Everything else is, yes, sir.
Okay. So basically,
it's just a short addendum, essentially.
Yeah, basically we're just adding this to the publication in the newspaper. Okay.
That's correct, Representative.
Representative Flood has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Atwood, I thought what I heard you say initially was that the county would have to report how it uses the excess or the surplus funds. Is that correct?
Under current law, in your report, you have to file a non-technical report, and you're supposed to show the original estimated cost of each project. There's essentially four things that you have to show. The current estimated cost of it, if it's not the original cost, amounts expended in prior years, and the amount expended in the current year. That's all that, according to what I read and researched and others have done, that are currently required. This adds the surplus funds that are out there that have not been used. Did I answer your question?
No, I understood that part. What I was getting to is are surplus funds required to be returned back to the taxpayers?
Not to my knowledge.
From a
I think they can be under a recent bill, I believe, that we did last year.
I believe under SPLOS, which specifies how the funds are to be used initially. If there is surplus funds, they have to be returned to the taxpayers in the form of a tax reduction.
This essentially requires them to tell them what they're doing with it.
But the what should already be determined by the law, which would be that it has to be returned to the taxpayer.
Okay.
I have another question. You didn't mention in Section 2 the role of the Superior Court. Is there a punishment for the county or municipality if they
Principally,
do not?
what Superior Court would do is provide injunctive relief. That would require them to go and to report. If the Attorney General came in and wanted to take action, he could take both civil and criminal action. Criminal action would fall under the existing laws of Georgia, such as abuse of office and that sort of thing. It'd have to be fairly egregious, though.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I see no further questions, Representative Atwood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
Members of the committee, we're about to take up House Bill 450 by Representative Sims. For your information, last year, this bill was reported favorably out of Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee. It passed out of this full committee and went to Rules, where it resided at the end of the session. It's now been recommitted to this full committee, and therefore we are acting on it today. Representative Sims.
Do you want Representative Parsons to do his bill before we do this?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Representative Parsons. Yes, Representative Parsons, House Bill 761. If Mr. Secretary, if you would
yes, thank you.
read the caption, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 761 by Representative Parsons and others to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code relating to exemption from state sales and use tax as to add an exemption with respect to the sale or use by a government contractor of overhead materials for a limited period of time.
Sales Tax Subcommittee. Chairman Parsons.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. This is actually an exemption that was in existence. We didn't extend it 2 years ago in a year that we didn't extend any of these. So it expired. I want to do a first reader on it, which I'm doing now, and get it in a subcommittee. It exempts for government contractors sales tax on overhead material used to produce products that are involved in that contract with the Department of Defense or the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. It's been a contention of Lockheed that that law, I guess federal law, already establishes that they don't have to pay this. This doesn't have to be paid. There's been a conversation, a discussion with DOR over the last several years. It's my understanding that now DOR, the commissioner, has said that he agrees that they shouldn't have to pay this and that they won't be. But I want to go ahead and get this first reader done and get it in a subcommittee just to have it there in case we need to have it. It's my understanding that this will be taken care of by an opinion of the commissioner of DOR.
Questions of the author? Chair sees none. Representative Sims, you may now address House Bill 450 to this full committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, this bill is a bill we had last year. It involved public housing and the problems they have in collecting their final rents, and also the damage that's going on in the public housing section of community. And what happens is that people move off usually owing the last 1 or 2 months rent. They have no way of collecting that, and they also leave damage, and they have no way of collecting that. And what this bill allows the housing authority to do is to garnish any income tax refund that they may get from the state, not the federal, but from the state of Georgia, to pay that cost, whatever it may be. It's costing our own taxpayers a bunch of money to go in there and have to fix these things, and also to have to pay that off at the end when these folks won't do it. Sometimes these folks only live in public housing a couple of months. Sometimes they live for many years. But if they walk away, it's still somebody has to pay for it, and it's the rest of the community and the rest of the state that has to pay for the damage and or the rent that's lost. That's basically what the bill does. I'll stand for any questions.
Questions of the author of the bill, of the members of the committee? Seeing none, Chair will entertain a motion. Move to pass is second. There's a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Bill passes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. We are adjourned.